27 years ago, professional scallywag Goldie Roger was rudely interrupted on one of his many voyages by one Golden Lion Shiki, commander of the largest pirate fleet on the planet, and Shiki then gave Roger an ultimatum: join me or die. And Roger chose neither, as what ensued was one of the most incredible events in One Piece history that saw the collapse of an empire, the rise of a king, and the birth of a legacy that is still waiting to be fulfilled to this very day. This is the story of the Battle of Ed War, which is one of the most influential events in fictional pirate history that you'd never even know about if it wasn't for extended media, because it occurs in Chapter 0 of One Piece, which is an absolute nightmare just to find on its own. It does have an official English translation, but it was never uploaded with the rest of the Viz manga, and to the best of my knowledge, the only way to read it is by purchasing one of the physical manga box sets, which are not cheap at all, and that's a shame, because by far the most accessible way to read Chapter 0 is through online scans, which don't have, amazing translations, as we'll see in a bit, but especially in this case because Chapter 0 was released in 2009, and scans released in 2009 were, I should say that Chapter 0 does have an anime adaptation called Episode 0, but this has similar problems. It's not on Crunchyroll with the rest of One Piece, and it can only be viewed through fan subs on less than reputable websites, which very much has the same problem as the manga. The translations and the video quality, not great, so you really do have to dig deep to find out about this event. And once you have dug deep and greedily, you then need to sift through the inaccuracies presented by the fan subs, the scans, and even the officially translated English media if you can find it, because just like what happens in real history sometimes, we have 3 different sources that do not agree about how the following event transpired. For example, the name of this fictional historical event itself is often the first point of confusion, and you'll often hear this event, no wait, that's a lie, very few people talk about this, but when they do, a lot of people just refer to it as the Ed War, in the same sort of way that we call the Battle of Marineford the Paramount War. However, the confusing part is that in this case, Ed War is a location. The war part of Ed War is just a coincidence, and one that has conflicting translations in English. In the scanlations, which are again by far the most accessible way of reading it in English, Ed War is referred to as an island. It is reported that Roger and Shiki have made contact off the coast of Ed War. However, in the officially translated and almost impossible to find manga, it is referred to as the Ed War Bay. However, in the anime adaptation of Chapter 0, it's called the Ed War Ocean. So we have an island, a bay, or an ocean. No one can exactly agree on what Ed War is. However, I personally think that the anime is the closest because the Ed part of Ed War is likely taken from the concept of an eddy, which is a turbulent circular current of ocean, and one that could be a seasonal or even permanent fixture somewhere in the wacky world of weather that is One Piece. We also never get to see an island or a bay, so it does seem likely that this battle took place in an unimaginably dangerous patch of ocean. Not an ideal battleground for either side, but it was one that was chosen out of a combination of strategy and desperation. Like many, if not all, events from the era of legends, the inciting incident that manifested the Battle of Ed War was something that Goldie Roger did. In this case, Roger had discovered the location of one of the 3 ancient weapons, word of which quickly spread to every other major pirate in the New World at the time, including the instigator of this battle, Golden Lion Shiki. And when this was published in 2009, that was a fairly reasonable and irrefutable discovery. However, now with the power of 15 years of foresight, it does raise the question of, well, which ancient weapon was it? Because all 3 of them have some historical issues. The weapon I'm 100% certain it could not have been is Poseidon, primarily because Poseidon is an ability inherited by the Ryugu royalty. It's the power to communicate with and command sea kings, which pops up seemingly arbitrarily through the generations of Fishman royalty. However, at this point in time, Poseidon's next user, Princess Shirahoshi, hadn't been born yet, and the Battle of Ed War also took place 2 years before Roger would hear Charlie's prophecy about her birth. So he had no idea who Poseidon was going to be. In fact, he didn't even know where it was going to be, because the Roger pirates also hadn't at the time found the poneglyph on Skypiea that revealed the location of Poseidon. That one was only found during their final journey with Kozuki Oden. So Poseidon is completely ruled out as a possibility. It's also highly unlikely to have been Uranus, the mysterious sky weapon capable of obliterating entire islands through the power of the Mother Flame, and it's unlikely because this weapon is in possession of the world government and may very well be what is referred to as the National national treasure, something that they've been hanging on to for an awfully long time. However, they were unable to actually use it until its fuel source was successfully replicated, which is what Dr. Vegapunk accidentally went on to do as part of his dream to provide free, limitless energy to everyone around the world. Unlike Poseidon, though, we can't 100% rule Uranus out. It's possible that Roger found it and Uranus was then later commandeered by the world government, but at the moment, the simpler explanation is that Uranus is a weapon that the world government have had command of since the conclusion of the Void Century, which brings us to what I think is the most likely candidate, Pluton. Now, at first, this seems tricky as well because we now know that Pluton is buried deep beneath Wano, and at this point, Roger had not yet visited Wano. In fact, we don't even know if Roger ever went to Wano. Odin was picked up by Whitebeard, and Roger dropped Odin off alone to quickly take a bit of a rubbing of their road poneglyph. So as far as we know, Roger never went to Wano. However, Pluton's location is detailed on the poneglyph within the Alabaster Tomb, which is implied to be one of the poneglyphs that Roger had managed to find prior to recruiting Kozuki Odin, because it wasn't on the stops of their Round World Mystery Cube tour. However, as far as we know, Roger has even less of a connection to Alabaster than he did to Wano, and we've only ever heard of the slightest, maybe speculative connection between Roger and King Cobra, and that tiny shred of information also came to us from Chapter 0. We see one panel of Cobra reacting to the news of Roger's execution several years after the Battle of Ed War, and he remarks that a terrible age has begun, which also comes with its own piece of confusion which relentlessly attacks the mind brains of those who did manage to find Chapter 0, which is that also in this panel is who appears to be Nefertari Vivi, which is that's rather shocking because she wasn't even born at the time of Roger's execution. And I have seen this cited as a continuity error by Oda, but this is actually Vivi's mother, Nefertari Titi, who passed away due to the incurable condition of being a mother in One Piece. Although to be fair to anyone who mistakes her for Vivi, she does look very different from the only other time that Titi has been drawn in the manga. That aside, we also do know that Cobra, Vivi, and maybe Titi as well were all members of the D-Clan, which is another mind-brain melting moment, because Vivi looks exactly like Titi, who looks exactly like their ancestor Nefertari D. Lily. So who exactly in this family is the descendant of Lily? Is it Cobra, Titi, or both? And we have a bit of an enhanced emphasis on family values in the Alabaster royalty, maybe. Setting that aside, for now I think it's reasonable to propose that somewhere in history, Roger encountered King Cobra and Cobra assisted this D-connection. He showed him the Alabaster poneglyph. Roger went, cool, because of course Roger couldn't read poneglyphs, so there was limited amounts that he could do with this. However, Cobra did know that Pluton's location was detailed there, and he could have told Roger, which is information that was then somehow spread throughout the world, resulting not only in our upcoming Battle of Ed War, but also this is likely how Crocodile discovered that Alabaster was connected to Pluton, and why 2 decades later he began a civil war in the desert nation to attain it. But let's turn our attention back to main antagonist Golden Lion Shiki. Shiki, along with apparently everything in this video, is a perpetually confusing character who exists in a space that I call Schrodinger's canon. He both is and isn't canon at the same time. The simplest way to state it is that everything in Chapter 0 and his subsequent flashback manga appearances are canon, but everything in One Piece film's Strong World is not canon. But as for what happened, Shiki is yet another Rocks Pirate alumni who splintered off and started his own crew after the destruction of the Rocks Pirates during the God Valley incident. And history views Shiki as one of the lesser known Rocks Pirates. He didn't go on to have the sheer impact that names like Edward Newgate, Charlotte Lin, and Kaido would. And that's because history can be rather cruel. Because at this point in time, 27 years ago, Shiki wasn't just a big name, he was the big name. It was said that he had the largest fleet of any pirate of that era, and even though we can't properly quantify it, he may very well have had the largest fleet in pirating history. So Shiki had a fleet of 51 ships, and each of those ships contained a separate division of his forces. So he had at least 51 divisions within the Golden Lion Pirates. Now in terms of sheer scale, compare that to the Whitebeard Pirates, an absolutely colossal crew commanded by an Emperor of the Sea, and they only had 16 divisions. So Shiki's fleet was approximately 3 times larger, although it's unknown what the qualitative strength of his commanders were. In the manga, we only really see 3 of them. We've got this guy, that guy, and this not guy, who, fun tangent, was once the target of a bizarrely popular Big Mom theory, which is that she is Big Mom. Remember that this was 2009, so about a million years before Big Mom was actually revealed to us. And these were the kind of scraps that we had to sustain ourselves with. But the only other known commander of the Golden Lion Pirates is Largo, the main antagonist of the Little East Blue arc, which was a tie-in to the Strong World movie and also non-canon. But Largo was said to be the commander of the 51st Division that went on to form his own crew known as the Amigo Pirates, because, I don't know if you've noticed, but Largo has a very subtle Mexican aesthetic going on. He also had a devil fruit that allowed him to create nets, like really sticky nets. It was rather unpleasant. And even though he isn't canon and we should forget about him immediately after I finish the sentence, Largo is the only known display of power that we've had from a Golden Lion commander, which does not bode well for their future in this battle. However, Shiki had not actually planned on fighting Roger directly, or in fact at all. He actually set sail and intercepted Roger to propose an alliance. A very aggressive alliance with the threat of being attacked by 51 ships if Roger refused, but Shiki wanted to join forces with Roger, to combine his, at the time, unmatched manpower with Roger's knowledge specifically of their ancient weapon, which Shiki wanted to use to rule the world. Shiki's broader goal was something world domination, the same as his former captain Roxty Zebek. But this meeting was a worrying development, and one that we've seen examples of since. The world government live in perpetual terror of two emperors of the sea joining forces, because they only have the power to fight against one emperor at a time, which is why the meeting between Shanks and Whitebeard was so heavily monitored, with the world government fully prepared to go to war should an alliance be formed. And the same worry was expressed 2 years after that, when Big Mom and Kaido formed an alliance on Wano, which would have resulted in a force that the Marines could never have even hoped to measure up to. But that was stopped during the raid on Onigashima, before the two empires could properly unite. Now, Roger did, of course, refuse Shiki's offer, because Roger had no desire to rule the seas, let alone the world. He very much had the Luffy philosophy on freedom. He may have been a king, but Roger was no conqueror. And so Roger and his singular vessel of a handful of men geared up and prepared to fight the largest pirate fleet in the world all on their own. So there was no alliance on this day. But what happened with Shiki and Roger was an early example of emperor politics that has shaped so much of modern One Piece. Although as far as we know, neither Shiki nor Roger was an emperor of the sea. Although they could have been, especially Shiki, because even if he wasn't, he did possess the power and influence that would form the criteria of an emperor. So whether or not he had the title, or even whether or not the titles existed at that point, Golden Lion Shiki was effectively an emperor of the sea. And so panic ensued when word of this meeting reached the Marines, after which point Fleet Admiral Kong immediately mobilized a force led by Admiral Sengoku and comprised of many now legendary names, including Kuzan, Sakazuki, Suru, Jaguar D. Sol. And even though he wasn't ordered to, Monkey D. Garb also decided to head out on this mission because it involved an opportunity to catch Roger. And just as a reminder of who else was already involved in this incident on Roger's side, on board he had Silver's Rayleigh, Copacabana, a very young Shanks, as well as Buggy, so two era-appropriate legends and two future legends who would eventually become Emperors of the Sea. This had the potential to become another God Valley incident, where almost every major global power collided with one another. However, as it would turn out, the Marines wouldn't even have time to reach the Edwar battleground, because this battle was over almost as immediately as it began. After a brief exchange of fierce battle combat, the choice of venue would be heavily called into question, because Edwar, as mentioned previously, was almost certainly a colossal and volatile eddy, and the weather took a sharp turn to the apocalyptic, and within a moment, half of Shiki's fleet had been sunk, about 25 ships gone in an instant, and forcing the call to retreat. But not before Shiki received a rather unique injury, as a rogue steering wheel was lodged in his head. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Shiki lost this battle the moment he started it. And I imagine that choosing to intercept Roger at Edwar was designed as a show of power, a grand gesture to display how Shiki controls these seas, but it backfired. It backfired big time. As it turns out, Shiki could not control the ocean, and it turned his certain victory into an unimaginable defeat, and the collapse of an empire so embarrassing that one of the most influential and powerful men of this entire era has been reduced to a comical footnote of history. Had Shiki made, let's say, a more reasonable choice, let's say a calmer territory, then Roger's defeat here would have been all but guaranteed. So Roger escaped, and in the aftermath of the battle, Shiki scrambled what remaining forces he had, but he was no longer the ruling faction of the New World, and he would rapidly lose power until one day he decided to throw it away entirely during a one-man raid of Marineford. This was very much a protest raid because Shiki was enraged that Roger had been captured and scheduled to be executed in East Blue, aka the weakest of all of the seas in the world. And when I said before that Roger's defeat was all but guaranteed if Shiki had made better choices, this is where we see the truth of that. Because what it took to bring Shiki down was a combination of both Garp and Sengoku, and even then this fight destroyed half of Marineford before Shiki was finally subdued. He was a very serious individual power, and I think a lot of people tend to equate him to the Shiki that we see in the Strong World film, but that doesn't even begin to depict what this man was capable of. However, following this, Shiki was imprisoned in Impel Down. However, he became the first recorded person, not the first person, but recorded person to escape from the Great Prison, scribbling his name onto the Great Graffiti Wall of History one last time, as after this he vanished into obscurity. His last words were a claim that he had a plan to create hell on earth, and this is the plan that we're still waiting for him to enact to this very day.